Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you've got myself, Collin, and I'm joined by Nick as we break down the opening weekend for It Chapter 2. And remember, as always, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com. Alright, so breaking down this week's top 5, no surprise, in first place is It Chapter 2 with 91 million domestic, followed a long way off by Angel Has Fallen at the number 2 spot with 6 million. In third place is Good Boys with 5.39 million, followed by The Lion King, which is sitting in fourth place at 4.193 million this weekend. And Overcomer rounds out the top 5 with 3.75 million. So it's pretty predictable box office weekend in terms of performance rankings. So It Chapter 2 was, a little bit of a gamble, I guess, in terms of where it would place, but everything else is just kind of performing predictably. The positioning is pretty average. Nobody expected Angel Has Fallen to beat it this weekend. So it is a weekend at the box office. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, not a lot going on this week except It Chapter 2. It's kind of one of those weird times where last weekend nothing came out because it was Labor Day weekend. And then after that, It Chapter 2 kind of planted its flag as a big tentpole coming. So then every other studio basically says, all right, we're not touching that, so we're going to wait till the next week. So we actually have a lot of films coming out next week. So yeah, there wasn't really much new going on besides It Chapter 2.
Yeah, and I mean, it opened up to 185 million worldwide, so it's about a 50-50 split in terms of domestic worldwide performance, which is, for a horror movie, this is ridiculously phenomenal, because horror normally stays pretty low comparatively in the opening weekend, but this is also Stephen King, so he's got a lot more of a push behind it. And again, It Chapter 1, we talked about last week, it grossed a little over 700 million at the box office 2 years ago. So I have no doubt that It Chapter 2 will be pretty much on pace with that, maybe a little bit lower, but it's still making a lot of money.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to lag behind a little bit. So the first its opening weekend was 123 million. It was a big deal. It set all of these September records and just burst onto the scene. And so we have a 91 million opening. So it's a bit of a gap there, about 32 million. We'll see when the actuals come in later this week. But yeah, I think a lot of this just comes with the length of the movie, which, I mean, we'll talk in spoilers later on about the other problems with the length in terms of just the narrative of the story. But yeah, this less show times this time around, and yeah, it's tough to really, unless you're Avengers Endgame, it's really tough to throw out a 3-hour movie and kind of just go nuts at the box office. But yeah, you can't complain. 180 million worldwide. Budget was right around 60 to 70 million, so it's already in the black after its first weekend. So everything after this is gravy. So yeah, I would imagine it's probably going to end up somewhere around 500 million, 600 million, maybe 550, somewhere in there. But I mean, it's a horror movie, which, I mean, even though this is a little more expensive than typical horror movies, like, they're always a good bet no matter what, because you can always find ways to keep that cost down, and fake blood is pretty cheap. So yeah, it's another example of horror just being a great bet in the movie marketplace.
Yeah, and so it is performing. It's performed pretty well for a horror movie, and I'm sure I think it'll have a little bit longer legs than the average horror movie would, just because, it is Stephen King, and it is it's horror, but it's also got a lot of action adventure elements to it, and so I think those will help carry it a little bit longer than something like Ready or Not, or even some of the other horror movies we saw earlier this year, like Us or anything like that. Longer legs than those had, just because it is a little bit more of a blockbuster than your typical horror movie would be.
Yeah, I agree there as well. I mean, there's always so much intrigue with Stephen King adaptations. I mean, he's just a really good writer. That's just, it's as simple as that. And so, yeah, even like next week too, we have a few movies coming out. Like we have like Hustlers, which is the new Jennifer Lopez movie, which actually looks kind of fun. It's getting pretty good early buzz, so that'll be a fun thing. And then we have like The Goldfinch, which is maybe like the first big possible Oscar contender to come out. And Brittany Runs a Marathon comes out, releases wide after a few weeks in limited release. But like these movies just are just entirely different from It Chapter 2. There's not a lot of audience crossover there, like at all. So yeah, you probably expect this movie to actually drop pretty decently next week. That, like we've mentioned before, that horror drop is right around 60% week to week. But I mean, even though the movie's really long, people love it. It's a generational story, just going back to the TV movie years ago. So I expect this movie to go around 50% drop next week, and then it should be off to the races. And yeah, it's got to make a ton of money. Warner Brothers is starting off the fall really solidly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, it's not facing anything really blockbustery in nature for a little while. So it'll probably stick around the top five as we move on through the rest of the month. And then as far as everything else that's currently in the top five, I don't think it's going to be sticking around too much longer. The strongest performer here, obviously, is going to be Lion King, which is just a little under $1 million short of 1.6 billion worldwide. It's sitting at the number 7 spot all time. So out of every movie that's ever been released, it is the 7th highest grossing. It passed Furious 7 and the Avengers within the past week and a half, 2 weeks. And I would be extremely surprised if it managed to earn another 72 million and past Jurassic World. But I think for now it's pretty solid here at the number 7 spot.
Yeah, I still find it crazy that this, like, it doesn't, I haven't really talked to anybody that seems to like this movie and it's just still doing crazy business, which is just really funny. And just it's the power of the original Lion King just rearing its head once again. It's really, really interesting stuff there. And I guess one other note that I found really interesting was just Overcomer, the latest faith-based movie, is actually doing really good business. I think this is another example of just marketing to your audience like really strongly. So these movies are kind of like horror movies; they're always really cheap to make. So Overcomer was about 5 million, and it's quietly made almost 25 million domestically. So I mean, all those group sales and big church groups and things like that, like they really do show up in the ledger in a strong way there. So that's another interesting point. It's a little tiny decent success here into the fall.
Yeah, so that wraps up the top five for the most part. There's just not a lot going on. So we will get into some more interesting and actually relevant things. So we're going to be talking It Chapter 2 spoilers. So if you haven't seen It Chapter 2, now would be a good time to go watch it and then come back and listen to us break it open. So first, let's just go. What did you think of It Chapter 2?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I actually tweeted this right after I saw the movie, where the second movie made me very nostalgic for the first movie, which is weird because it came out 2 years ago. Because it seems like it's really playing off of like how big of a runaway success the first It was, with all these callbacks to things that happened in the past. And I know that's kind of how the book works out too, but it really feels like there's like a little bit of like a fan service element to this movie where it's like, oh, I remember how important and such a big deal that the first It was back in 2017, and we're playing off of that as well. And hey, that's smart. You got to do what you got to do there. But yeah, it's really tough because I think there's a lot of great stuff in this movie. We'll get into it, I'm sure, in further detail. I think Bill Hader is just incredible in this movie. I mean, we kind of saw with Barry, like he's clearly like a fantastic actor, but I think this is, if I might be wrong, but this is like his first really big movie role where everyone, like on a big scale, where everyone's like, oh shit, Bill Hader, he's really great. So yeah, he's awesome. The cast is great. You know, James McAvoy and Jessica Chastain, and I think it's really solidly cast all around. But yeah, this movie is it's 3 hours long. That's just a lot. The script is, I think I really have a lot of problems with the script, which we'll get into as well. But yeah, it's 3 hours long and takes about 30 minutes to get the gang back together again. You see Mike is just calling everybody on the phone, just one by one, telling them to come back to Derry, and they finally get back, have their dinner, and then they have to split up again to find all their artifacts and go on their own personal journeys. So it felt like a lot of unnecessary space used in that first half of the movie, and just didn't feel necessary. So yeah, I would have loved to see something maybe like a closer to the first It, like a 2 hour and 15 minute cut of this movie. I don't know how you would do that with all these like different elements, all these moving parts going on. But yeah, it's quite a mixed bag on my end.
Yeah, I think last week we were talking about the first 30 minutes of John Wick Chapter 3 and how that's the most entertaining, greatest thing to ever happen to movies. And I feel like the first 30 minutes of It Chapter 2 are completely on the opposite end of the spectrum from that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just so much exposition and covering basically the events of the first movie, and literally you have to see Mike call everyone. And there are, what, 7 of them that he has to call. And so it just takes forever to get started. And then once it gets started, it really works at some points, and then it just completely doesn't in others. And I liked parts of this movie, but as a whole, I definitely think It Chapter 1 is the better half. And I think this movie does a lot of interesting things at times, but then is just stumbling over itself at others, and really drags in the middle. And by the end of the 3 hours, I was just ready to get out. Like I was so done.
Yeah, I was right there with you. I was so tired at the end of this movie. We'll get into it as well with what my feelings are on Pennywise in general. But yeah, like as you mentioned, like this, like there's just so much dead space in here, and it's like that when Mike is just calling every single person in this group, it's done in the most like unimaginable way. It's like textbook like screenwriting 101. It's like, oh, like what has this person been up to for like the past 10 years, and we're going to show them at work or what they're doing, and then they get a call, then their life gets turned upside down. Like it's just very standard, and there's just not really much to it. So yeah, it's like, and then obviously Stanley like takes his own life, which is just I don't know, it just felt very weird considering how it was the rest of the movie leading up to that point was just very, all right, we're going to get to this point, and then this point and move from there. It felt weird in terms of pacing. But then, yeah, I think this group gets together again, and at that dinner, it's just Bill Hader is just on fire. Like he just going joke after joke, just really messing with Eddie, and it really feels like they let Bill Hader just run wild with improv, and he's making fun of Eddie's mom, and just it is really good, and it's one of the few moments in this movie where like all these really talented actors get to play off each other, and like that's in that one moment, it's kind of where you feel like the movie recaptured like the group camaraderie that was in the first movie. Because I have my problems with the first It, but it's like you love the kids and they're really great characters, and but they won't quite dive into that as much in this movie. I think other than Bill Hader, I mean, it's just James McAvoy is just a good actor, so he's just kind of telling his lines, but I can't really like glean anything else from his character or his growth, or I mean, they really try to trying to avenge his Georgie and getting over his personal guilt, but it feels pretty flat, and same with the other arcs as well. I don't know, what did you think?
Yeah, I think, well, I really like that Bill Hader was finally able to work his Jabba the Hutt impression into a movie. So that's officially part of Hollywood now. But yeah, I think some of the arcs just feel really disjointed from where the characters were at when we saw them in It Chapter 1. And I mean, yeah, there's, a 27-year gap, so obviously characters are going to grow and change a little bit, except for like half of them do, but then the other half of the gang still has the same issues they had when they were kids. So like Beverly, after her because I would say other than Bill, she probably has the biggest character arc in It Chapter 1. And that was just this whole coming to terms with like, hey, my dad's a creep and I'm not going to be objectified like this anymore. and then she's like really just right back in that position basically. And Eddie kind of does the same thing, and then you have Bill, who has a bunch of uh, I'd say you call it survivor's guilt for the most part, and then
Yeah,
feeling
yeah,
responsible for Georgie, which I guess we saw a little bit of in it chapter one, but it was more just his denying that Georgie was dead, and so I do and I don't like that arc just because it wasn't really present, and then I'm sure we'll talk about Richie a little bit later, but his arc um, seemed a little off at points, especially in like his relationship with Eddie, and so yeah, it's just really clunky at points. And I mean, you have a phenomenal cast, specifically with James McAvoy and Bill Hader and Jessica Chastain, and then the other people. Um, but it never really came together quite like the first one did.
yeah. So the screenwriter on this one is Gary Dauberman, and he's actually a very prolific, and he's been very quite successful. He's kind of in the same camp as James Wan for Warner Brothers, where he's kind of one of their guys as one of their screenwriters. He wrote and directed Annabelle Comes Home, which came out a few months ago, and he's been involved in a lot of the Conjuring universe, and I think he co-wrote the script for it Chapter One after Cary Fukunaga left the project. But yeah, so he's the only one writing this screenplay this time, and I mean, his screenplay style, I would say, it's just very Hollywood and standard, kind of what we were kind of hinting at earlier. I mean, if you saw Annabelle Comes Home, it's just the very standard, like basically everything happens in a house. Um, just demons come in. There's some occasional pretty decent like set pieces, but other than that, like it's just very like arch character work, where it's like it's like building off of these cliches that you've seen many times again. And I feel like that's kind of him doing the same thing here, where it's like the second act of this movie, where every character is off finding their own separate artifact. It just really drags, and it's the same. It's kind of like with the phone calls. It's the same kind of structure, where someone goes off, they have a memory that they flash back to that's traumatizing, and then Pennywise jumps out, scares them for 5 seconds, and then disappears with no reason, and then they shift to the next character. And that's like what, like for an hour of this movie, and then they finally come back together again. It's just really very tiring.
Yeah, it gets exhausting, and like they go through, I forget which character goes first, and you're like, okay, like that was interesting, and then it happens again. You're like, okay, are we gonna see all seven of these? And yeah, you do. And
Yeah.
I think it's Bill. You actually see it twice, and or they like split his up, but yeah, it just the second act of it where they're all split up and trying to conquer Pennywise on their own, where he definitely has a chance to kill every single one of them and then doesn't because of plot. It just really drags.
Yeah, and even into the third act again, it's all about structure is the theme of this conversation, where it's basically the same ending again, where they're in a dark cave trapped with Pennywise, and he seems to have all this power, and then they all realize the power of belief, and they kind of gang up on him and take away his power as a scary demonic entity, and then he gets scared, and then he's defeated. So it's basically the same thing again, where it's like the whole movie feels kind of like a retread, where we're just kind of, it feels like like all the great stuff was in with the kids, which I mean, anyone you really talk to who's read the book, and it's like, yeah, like the stuff with the kids is always better, and we saw that in the TV film as well. But yeah, it just feels like they're just kind of here to end all of this without really doing anything new, because it just kind of wraps itself up in like this kind of very Hollywood, like, oh, if we believe hard enough, we can conquer our demons, and it rang pretty false to me in that sense. But other than that, like, I would like to get to some positives at some point, because I do like a lot of stuff in this movie. But like the one last gripe I have is I feel like Pennywise has been vastly underutilized in actually both of these films, where it's just a lot of it's I've had my issues with jump scares in the past with a lot of these Conjuring and other Warner Brothers horror movies, but there's just a loud bang. Pennywise comes out. He's doing his maniacal giggle. He's around for like maybe 5-10 seconds, and then he just disappears on a whim. There's not really like a extended horror sequence, which is really frustrating because it feels like Bill Skarsgård's doing a lot of great work. He's deranged. He's making his eyes cross-eyed. He's puffing out his lips to make him look all creepy. Like he's doing a lot of really good stuff. And I feel like probably the one time where he got to, or maybe there's two times where he's really got to emote and act as Pennywise was the drain sequence with Georgie in the beginning of It Chapter 1, and then also in the horror house in the first It, when he just is, when I think it's Eddie who breaks his arm and he's just kind of messing with him and runs over and just starts laughing in his face, where it's like those two scenes are kind of like the only times we've got a chance to really see him just kind of do his thing, and otherwise it's just like, oh, creepy clown, and then I'm gonna be weird and then leave for a little bit. It's frustrating. I feel like there's a lot more they could have done there.
Yeah, he felt really gimmicky in this one, and I mean he kicks out the movie, killing people, and then he has like the same move he uses 3 times over to bite some kid's head off. That's like his thing in this movie, and so he just feels a lot more gimmicky, especially in terms of how he interacts with the characters. Like it gets really predictable with the second act again, where they're just walking around, and you're like, oh, well, they're seeing their childhood memory now. So where's Pennywise in this scene? And there's no real element of surprise. And I think it has done a decent job between the two movies of not using a ton of jump scares, but there was still a lot more tension in the first one. And I just didn't feel like that tension was here. And then the worst part for me was the fact that Pennywise is killed in the same manner as Cara Delevingne's character in Suicide Squad. And it just made me think of Suicide Squad, and that was where I clocked out.
Yeah, anything that makes you think of Suicide Squad, it's probably not doing its job. But yeah, it's just really tough. I think there's some really fun sequences in here. I mean, you mentioned that Pennywise is just biting off kids' heads, I think that's kind of fun. I mean, yeah, it's depraved, but it's also like, oh, there's like no limits to what this film can do, and no one's really safe, which I think is kind of fun just for the internal logic of the story. But I think there's one really good horror sequence, which is the funhouse sequence, which I really like. It's really creative with the mirrors, and James McAvoy's trying to track down the kid who he wants to save to kind of get over his survivor guilt from Georgie, and he's banging it on all these walls, and then you just kind of see Pennywise just start toying with him, and then he just starts bashing his own head into the glass to get to the kid, and it's one of the few times where the dread really gets to seep in, and we have a little bit of an extended like little bit with Pennywise, because otherwise it's like, yeah, he's hiding in a locker and then scaring people, and then he disappears, or he turns into Bev with a demon head who's on fire, and then then it's over. Or it's a lot of these just quick like jolts of energy, which might work for some people, but I much prefer horror when I mean, the jump scares are fine, but it has to lead to like somewhat of an extended sequence, and just that's when the dread really just pops up, and I think that's a lot more fun. But yeah, the mirror sequence I thought was really great, and I think that was probably my favorite scene in the entire movie, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and I think for me, Pennywise and his tension with the characters seemed to be the best when he wasn't on screen, because there's a good chunk of this movie where he's just toying with them, like in the Chinese restaurant, and when he's just really getting in Bill's head and like leaving him these messages and keeps reminding him about this kid that he's gonna kill, and like he's doing his best work when he's not there, because when he's there he's just trying to push the characters along so they can all come together and kill him, basically. And I feel like Pennywise is probably this movie's weakest link, even though he does have some good moments. Like there's one that's kind of this almost heartfelt scene with this girl that has, I'm assuming it's a birthmark or a burn of some kind, and you see Pennywise get to feign humanity for a little bit before he kills her, and they seem to have like this little tender connection that's obviously a murder joke, but Um, it works.
Yeah, it's really yeah, it's like that's maybe like one of the other. I mean, the reason I didn't mention that as well as for an extended fun bit with Pennywise is mostly because that's it's kind of the same thing with Georgie and the Drain. I felt like
Yeah,
because it's just oh like let's have a nice conversation, like let me disarm you. I mean, he had the whole conversation about popcorn in the first movie, how he loved popcorn so much, and this is just like oh I'm scary and no one loves me, so he's trying to reel in. The kid, and then there's like obviously a shocking dismemberment or death in both scenes. So it's yeah, it felt pretty repetitive there. But why don't we let's switch to the positives here. I'm feeling pretty down. So what was your what would you say was like the one character for you that really stood out? Was it Bill Hader or was it someone else?
yeah, it was Bill Hader. I he like I don't I think they took his arc sort of in an interesting direction, but also like it doesn't really make sense when it comes full circle at the end. But it's Bill Hader. Like he's having a good time. He knows he's playing like this fun character, and he's gonna lighten the mood in every scene. And I really like just his pairing with Finn Wolfhard is the kid version of him, and I mean that they're the funny version of Brando and De Niro in terms of two actors playing the same character. Like they just play really well off of each other despite never being in a scene together. And I mean, like Bill Hader's just great.
Yeah. So is it? I'm having trouble remembering. Is does he have? It's he's there's they hinted at a possible relationship with Eddie. Correct. It's not Stanley. Is
Yeah.
that how it works? So yeah,
Well,
I thought that was interesting. I kind of like that as like because Richie in these two movies just kind of been like the foul mouth guy just to be foul mouthed. But like I thought, I kind of agree with you there where it feels a little manipulative in the end when he's like carving his name back into the wood with like the R plus E type of thing there. And but I did like how them hinting at a possible romantic angle there was really nice because it kind of shows that his foul mouthed like persona is mostly just a front for like his real feelings, and I thought that was kind of touching, even though like you said, doesn't quite work out in the end. I feel like, but I think that was like one of the few like true attempts at like some stronger emotional resonance in this movie.
yeah, and I agree with that. It just seemed kind of weird with it being Eddie because there was never really anything to hint at it in the first It, and they use like some of the flashback sequences to establish that, but it still honestly feels like there was more of that with Stanley. Um, like if it was there with Eddie at all, because you don't even really see anything reciprocated on Eddie's end. It's just like, I've been in love with this kid for 27 years, and I'm gonna carve my name into the side of a bridge. And yeah,
Yeah,
it doesn't connect.
yeah, I definitely agree there. It feels like they're rewriting like scenes and recontextualizing things to build some sort of like to look for some deeper character involvement there. But yeah, it's one of those things where I really appreciate the effort because I just thought it was pretty thoughtful. And we kind of get to like some of the other characters. I had never heard of Jay Ryan before, who plays adult Ben. Looks like he's done a lot of TV work previously, but it was kind of funny how he was just kind of hunk. He was hunk man, just trying to look really attractive. I thought that was just really funny. But yeah, he's not like they're still working off of that love triangle between him, Bill, and Bev. And it's kind of like the flip side where they didn't really try anything new, where it was just like, oh, Bev can't remember. Um, she's got screenwriter's amnesia, which is just just really easy to kind of build tension in between characters. But yeah, other than the joke of wow, he's attractive and he's not pudgy anymore. It's just it was okay there. And then that's kind of the way I felt for just all these characters in general. Like Mike is played by Isaiah Mustafa, who's the Old Spice guy. If people didn't know that previously, he's just kind of exposition man, just there to forward the plot along. And yeah, it's not great. The rest of the character work I thought could have been a lot better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Everybody else, besides the three actors that you probably know by name, everybody else just feels like kind of a tag along. And I mean, they don't really change the deaths either from the original version. So I've never read the book, but the TV movie, Stan and Eddie are the ones that died. They died the exact same way, and they again do that here. And so I was a little disappointed by that as well, because you kind of knew it was coming, and I just feel like they could have done something a little bit different, just because this is a remake and the original is pretty well received and pretty well loved.
Yeah, it's funny that we're talking. I realize we just switched back to negatives again because it's this movie is it's just frustrating, man. Like you see all the great stuff in it, and I think it's funny because all the great stuff is some of the flashbacks to the kids. I just think are just like wonderful. And it's kind of funny because you can see how they're hiding that some of them have gone through like a little bit of a growth spurt, so they're trying to mess with them and to hide that as much as possible. But they're just so great, and the kids are just all just really really wonderful. And so I think that's kind of where like a lot of the great stuff for me comes in. It's really sweet. I mean, even though if it's kind of manipulative and all these flashbacks, but it's just really great just to see like, oh, like Ben hanging out with all and building his little shed in the forest, and everyone just kind of messing around with each other, and Finn Wolfhard just being just incredible as usual. All that stuff, all the kids stuff. Once again, it was just really great.
All right, I thought of another positive.
Let's hear it.
The head spider was like pretty creepy, and when like all the legs start coming out of his head, that was definitely the thing that grossed me out the most, when like a spider leg emerges from his eye. So that's a positive horror element.
Yeah, that was really fun, but I immediately just thought of The Thing because that's just like a very clear homage to The Thing in that instance. But it was really fun because I mean they're playing with a little bit of CGI, so yeah, you get to see like legs pop out, and the head is maniacally laughing too, which was really fun. Yeah, I really like that sequence as well. It's really really fun. Like I said, it's one of the, like I mentioned before, it's one of the few extended sequences, so they get a lot of stuff out of it. And there's building, and there's a story told within it, where Eddie is still scared. He's frozen in the corner. You really can't do anything, and you get a little character building in there as well. And I thought that was really really great.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the horror things that really worked for me. I mentioned it kind of going into it, but I think this movie was much more along the lines of kind of action adventure than it was horror, like the first one. Like this was a definite mission to go kill Pennywise, and I just think we lost some of the tension there.
Yeah, it really turns into. I've actually heard this is a really interesting take on a lot of these Conjuring and other Warner Brothers movies, where it's kind of like a superhero movie, but like the supervillain isn't like opposed by like some benevolent like superhero force, so they just have crazy powers that they can do with. That's kind of what Pennywise is in this movie. He just turns into a big spider thingy, which falls in line with the TV movie where he's just this weird stop motion spider. I mean, it's a little better this time around with the wonders of modern technology, but yeah, it just kind of feels like it's like, oh, look at all these cool powers I can do, like he turns like a Paul Bunyan statue into like a thing, which I thought was just one of the more like weird sequences where he's just like, I don't know, he just disappears and he shows up again and he's having fun messing with Bill Hader, and then he's like, oh, I know your secret. He's like hinting at his affection for Eddie, and then he like just like leaves without any like reason. It's like, oh, he's done. He's time to go mess with like another one of the characters, I guess. So yeah, very very interesting.
Yeah. So unless you have anything else to add about it, which we've kind of come back to all our negatives again, we can move
it's
on.
It's so tough. It's so frustrating.
I think we got 3 positives in there.
Yeah, we tried.
I'm proud. it was there was
Don't
an
add us on
effort.
Twitter, guys. Don't add us on Twitter. We tried our best.
So we'll move on to the Venice Film Festival, which has been really interesting to look at. There's a lot of controversial stuff coming out of it. So the I guess it depends on who you are, but the big one would be Joker winning the Golden Lion, which is pretty astounding that a comic book movie won that at the Venice Film Festival. But it kind of goes in line with everything we've heard about Joker so far. I've heard almost nothing but praise. Unfortunately, I've also heard nothing but praise from all the Twitter bots that haven't seen it yet, but it's nonetheless.
Yeah, it feels like it doesn't. It feels like Joker is gonna be like the it movie that stirs a lot of conversation in a lot of different directions because I mean, it's a gritty crime drama about white guy taking his anger to the streets, which is very interesting. But it's one of those things like, yeah, we've seen a lot of talk already from just a lot of people who haven't seen the movie. So I mean, in that respect, I'm gonna withhold a lot of my judgment until I actually see the damn thing when it comes out in the U.S. in the first week of October. But it is really interesting to see, like, this was a bold move for Warner Brothers. Like, how often do we see like these like big tentpole things like try to like make it in like the prestige world, all these great festivals? Like, basically never. Like, you don't see Thor Ragnarok opening at TIFF. So like this is quite a gamble because of early reviews out of Venice weren't like great. Like, what does that do for its box office and like its possible acclaim later on? But people really seem to like it, which is very fascinating. And I know a lot of other critics have their concerns about it. David Ehrlich from IndieWire has a really great review out that I encourage everyone to read. But yeah, it's definitely, it looks like there's something building here, right? Like, it looks like Joker, like, I mean, it's winning this award. It might propel it to like an extended Oscar run later this year and then early into next year. It really feels like it's moving that way.
Yeah, I definitely think that's kind of the trajectory it's on right now. And I'm excited to see it. I'm not excited to live in a world that's seen it just because it's going to be crazy. Twitter is going to be an awful place. Like, it's already bad with people just like all the DC boys uh, praising the movie they haven't seen yet and bashing every other movie that's ever been made. So
Yeah, I can feel the wave of just stuff coming. I'm not really looking forward to that. I hope people can talk about this movie in a really articulate way, but who knows? We'll see. That's very much to be determined. So yeah, I'm bracing myself for that because it's definitely going to be a whirlwind.
yeah. But fortunately, Joker wasn't the only thing playing at the Venice International Film Festival.
Yikes.
So I know Ad Astra is one you've been looking forward to for a while. The Laundromat is one that I'm excited for, and I've heard pretty decent reactions to Steven Soderbergh's latest. And then we'll get into the big scandal coming out of it as well. But anything you want to add on the other films that played?
I am I am so pumped for Ad Astra now. I was really intrigued. I mean, I've mentioned this on a few other pods as well, but like this movie was kind of weird. Like, it shifted release dates multiple times, got pushed back, and you kind of wondered with like a September release. We wondered like, what is this? Like, is this going to be like a Predator situation from last year where it's just a mess of a thing that they just tried to dump right before like the movie season starts to heat up again in October? But I mean, then reviews were kind of like astoundingly good out of Venice. And so my expectations like shot through the roof now. I really can't wait for that. So yeah, that's very, very encouraging.
Yeah, I'm excited for it too, and I'm glad it's getting a good recognition, good reviews, because I was kind of in the same boat, just not really sure what to make of it. It does have an extremely interesting premise, and I mean, you've got Tommy Lee Jones playing Brad Pitt's dad, so I mean, you couldn't really ask for anything better casting wise. And yeah, that's Venice.
Yeah.
The The other big scandal is Roman Polanski uh, placing and actually competing in the Venice International Film Festival. And I'll let you take the lead on that one.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sticky situation here. I mean, it's really tough. I mean, we all know Roman Polanski's history at this point. I mean, it's probably not worth it to relitigate it there. It's just it's messy, it's ongoing, it's tough. But he's been in France for many years. He's still making movies every single year. I mean, The Pianist was like probably his last major film that came over to the U.S. because a lot of his films, because of his legal issues, just don't ever make it over to the U.S. for theatrical release. I mean, just for obvious reasons, just people don't want to get involved. But he's been making films for a while, and his latest film, An Officer and a Spy, it finished second behind The Joker. So their first and second place films there. There's just they're a rich text of discussion, and both negatively and positively. But it gets even murkier when you find out that Polanski's movie is about the Dreyfus Affair, which is probably one of the more infamous French legal disputes like ever. So basically, it's kind of like this movie is kind of playing out like as a spotlight type of play where it's, oh, this person figures out that Alfred Dreyfus was wrongly accused of a crime, and he was sentenced to just a lot of jail time, and it's about exposing the truth and kind of liberating the wrongly convicted there. And so there's some kind of just some weird parallels to Roman Polanski in general with just that plot. So yeah, I'm not really looking forward to talking about this movie for the next couple of months either, because I mean the Oscars made changes to their foreign language category. It's now the international. I think it's the international film, best international film, and they extended it to 10 nominees, which is really cool, just the buzz for these movies from all around the world. But I imagine like this movie will probably be France's entrant into the Oscars this year, which just makes it even more sticky because Roman Polanski was disavowed from the Oscars from the Academy last year. So yeah, it's Venice is started out the festival circuit and the fall season with a bang, both I guess positively and then in a lot of ways negatively. So there's a lot of things to monitor, even as like TIFF kind of gets underway and other AFI Fest and everything, and a bunch of other movies have to come out. So yeah, and we're not even at the point where the Oscars are looking for a host yet for this year. So it feels like there's going to be a lot of different storylines moving into this year, which is both good and bad.
Yeah, I mean, we're literally at the beginning of award season in terms of movies that are actually going to make it to the Oscars. And what a way to start.
Yeah, it's just cut to us, call like 4 months from now, just pulling our hair out and just going through existential crises on our pod here. This is going to be let's all strap in because there's going to be a lot to discuss. Let's all. I hope everyone can keep a level head to discuss all these things. But yeah, there's going to be quite a shitstorm in some areas, and in other areas, who knows? So yeah, let's all get ready, folks.
Yeah, and I mean, if Disney has their way again, this will be the first year we have 2 comic book movies nominated for Best Picture between Endgame and Joker, and I don't even want to imagine the internet if that becomes a thing.
It's just, yeah, it's just more and more like, I mean, last year was kind of unprecedented with all like the bad press surrounding the Oscars, but we're getting it once again. Like, there's just going to be a lot of stuff going on. So I'm curious to see. I mean, we'll see when the Joker releases on October 4th here in the U.S. We'll kind of see how that kind of discussion turns out. But yeah, there's going to be many different things to look at here, and yeah, it's never dull.
No, it is not. Yeah, so that kind of wraps up everything with the box office going on with It Chapter 2, as well as the Venice uh, controversies. And I'm sure we'll be getting into more of those just as we get into more of the award season, as we have some other festivals coming up. It is just starting to get it's a busy and not busy time at the box office, because we just have, obviously, our blockbuster season is gone, but more of the artsy and kind of obscure or smaller movies are coming out of the woodwork. The stuff that tends to be talked about for a long time is coming up on us, so we're getting pretty close.
Yeah, really fun. It's in a lot of ways it's really fun, and I hope that kind of overshadows a lot of the negative stuff that we've kind of discussed and will probably come to our attention in the few months. But this is going to be a very, very interesting and possibly unprecedented award season. There's going to be a lot of different things going on with it. I'm really fascinated to see how it all shakes out, and we'll be here to discuss it all.
Yeah. So we'll be here next week talking about the Goldfinch, and I'm assuming It Chapter 2 again. Thanks for listening to this episode of the MovieBabble Podcast. Remember, you can always check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com, and we'll be back next week talking about the opening weekend for The Goldfinch.